Welcome to Old Path and our What in the World is Going On segments. We're taking a look at what's taking place in Israel and the Middle East. It's kind of an important topic, certainly as far as biblical matters are concerned and as far as eschatology is concerned too. I'm going to take 1 week of a break from the book of Psalms. We're going to start the book of Psalms in Psalm 119 next week, and there's so much that's there. I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to take care of this and not just kind of do it in passing, because it's a very, very major development. So just give me a week and we'll get back to the book of Psalms if that's what you're tuning in for today. As far as Israel is concerned and the things taking place with the attacks with Iran, there's a couple of things that I think it's wise for us as believers to leave two categories. There are some things that we know for absolutely certain. There are other things that we can only speculate at. And unfortunately, a lot of times people kind of cross those lines between what is speculation and speaking as though it's somehow fact. So it's best for us to kind of stay with what we absolutely know. As far as the next big engagement that I think that we can see, and that most of us, that kind of track with these things, there is debate as far as Psalm 83, there's debate as far as Isaiah 17, and how much of that has taken place. Is it still future? You get a lot of different speculation on that. But we do know this, the book of Ezekiel, especially when it gets to chapters 38 and 39, that is an engagement that we have no historic precedence for because of who's involved with it. And if you read chapters 36 and 37, Israel needs to be established in the land before all of that can take place. So if you start the clock at when Ezekiel wrote that, Israel was going to be displaced and they were going to be brought back into the land. Now, some would try to say that they're going to try to figure out a way to fit it historically after Ezekiel's writing, but the nations that come against Israel in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 part of that have never come together as far as a coalition is concerned. So if we're going to take the Bible literally, which of course, if you're tuning in, you probably already know that that's my view of this. I take it very literal. And the nations that are mentioned there just have never come as a coalition together against Israel. Now, in our day and age, it's very, very easy to try to figure out what really kind of binds them all together, and what might be able to bring them all in is something that, again, is very much debated. So let's stay with what we do know as far as Ezekiel's concerned. Of the nations that are clearly involved, and of course Persia or Iran is right at the top of that list. And so when you read the beginning verses of chapter 38, you know that there's a person and then there is a land that we look at as being part of what is traditionally Russia as far as the land territory. And there's disagreements on, just how far south that goes. But if we're trying to think about it through Ezekiel's eyes, what would it have looked like if he's seeing people from a particular part of the world that would be coming into some kind of a military engagement against Israel, followed with Persia and a number of other nations? So again, seeing it from where he is, some 2,500 plus years ago, when he writes what he does, Ezekiel, he's looking at the world that would be coming against Israel here and now. So that's what we have to try to remember. He's recalling nations as he would have known them, and actually from before his time. He's using the most ancient of names of them taken from Genesis chapter 10 to try to make it as timeless as it could be. Because we can go back to Genesis 10 and get a good idea of kind of the settling areas where these people lived. So again, it was not nation states as we think of them. It's geographical areas and the people who settled in those areas. If you overlay that with a modern map of the world, really, if you're looking at something that's someone who's coming down from the territory that is really modern day Russia, it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to try to figure a nation state that occupies the area that's mentioned in Genesis 10. And a lot of times that gets left out of this discussion. So we want to make sure that we understand two major parts of that. When Ezekiel writes, he's using the information provided through Genesis chapter 10 to define who it is that he sees in our day that would be coming against Israel. So that's what we want to make sure that we're looking at. So we're not looking at nation states back when Genesis 10 was written, or when those places were settled at that time. He's trying to take the oldest way of identifying land area and who now occupies it in our day and age, helps us to understand who it is that's going to be coming against Israel. So with that being the case, Persia is not really much of a surprise to us. There are nations in northern Africa that's excluded from being Egypt. Interestingly enough, the nations who have attacked Israel in times past, mainly the big movers, if you will, being Iraq and Jordan and Syria and Egypt and even Lebanon, are not the ones mentioned that are coming against them as far as Ezekiel is concerned. They're more the ones that are mentioned kind of more in Psalm 83. So anyway, again, so much speculation in that. So let's just stay with what we do know. The nations that are spoken about as far as Ezekiel is concerned are without any kind of a precedent, as I've said before, and something happens that brings them into the land of Israel and they come against it. So the speculation for decades, really, as the political and geopolitical world kind of changes, there's always something that's a new potential for what brings them in there. Natural resources, the Palestinian issue, it could be any variety of things. It's better that we stay with who it is that comes against them. And I do believe that primarily you have, as kind of overseeing all of it or having the lead role in it, is Russia. Now, Russia's involvement in that part of the world, whether it be Iran or Damascus, they're all over that area. But they also have their hands very much full as far as Ukraine is concerned, and the committing of troops to some kind of an incursion in the Middle East is going to be kind of a little bit more difficult as far as them fielding the people for it because of what they have going on with Ukraine. So I've been of the opinion all along that as long as Russia has their hands full in Ukraine, which they do, they have a lot of resource and a lot of manpower committed to it, and I don't think Putin has any intention of leaving that until somehow it comes to conclusion. But, again, there are a lot of people who will disagree with me on that. That's fine. This is, again, we're kind of in the whole area of speculation as to timing. Whether or not they're going to be involved, anybody who really follows this doesn't have much of a disagreement on that Russia ultimately becomes engaged in it. When you see Persia doing what it's done, and I've heard a lot of reporting on this about being unprecedented. Well, yes and no. No single nation has taken it upon themselves since the inception of Israel to do something unilaterally. So since 1948, it's always been a coalition of nations, and the same ones again and again, for the most part, who have come against them as a coalition. In this case, Iran kind of acted unilaterally. So that's what we do know. It's important because of who they are and because of their prominence in the group that comes against Israel eventually, as far as Ezekiel is concerned. But we want to keep that in its own little, if you will, kind of box. We know the people who will ultimately be that coalition. For the most part, there's almost unanimity in it. A couple of the players are in doubt, as far as some people give a couple of different possibilities. But it's not something that I really need to deal with as far as what we're talking about today. I want to kind of keep this between Iran and then, of course, Israel, and what we're doing, and even to some extent Europe, because that's the troubling part of it. So eventually, what will happen? Iran and Russia and another coalition of countries are going to move against Israel. And so what we do also know from the things that we read, there's not a whole lot in the way of people coming to the aid and the defense of Israel in this. They're kind of left on their own, which is exactly what God wants from it. Because as he says, I want everyone to know, from the world to Israel itself, to know that he is the Lord. It's going to be something that he does in the miraculous sense of coming to the aid of Israel, and they not only survive it, but the ones coming against them, as has been the case in times past, is decimated. So that's what we know. That is not really something that we have to look at and give a great deal of speculation. Now, let's kind of go through what's really precipitated this whole thing. And again, the world is so frustrating in how they're handling this whole thing. If you've been paying attention to the news over the last couple of months, you've heard a lot of reporting about nations trying to make Israel come to ceasefire agreements and any variety of different things. Never is the pressure put on Hamas to surrender, because they cannot win this battle. They don't put pressure on them saying, we will take away everything that you possibly have, every possession that you have, speaking to the upper leadership, if you don't return the hostages. The hostages were just taken for the very reason that they're being used now. They are human shields for the upper echelon of Hamas, and it's just such a cynical thing that they did. But that takes us all the way back to what happened on October the 7th. Let's remember how all of this took place and who the players are here. The two areas that now Israel finds itself under pressure, and now the third with Iran sending what they did, and we'll get to that in a moment. What you have are two proxies of Iran. And make no mistake about it, if, first of all, Iran didn't exist, or if it didn't have the money in order to fund all of this, partially because of the really horrible policy from our administration, they have a lot more money that's been freed up to them. We've backed away from sanctions and a whole variety of other things that our administration has backed away. It was a change between the Trump years versus the Biden years. That's just a statement of fact, and it's easily demonstrable. Well, anyhow, without Iran, there is no Hamas, there is no Hezbollah. Or if they would exist, which of course they would exist, but they wouldn't have the resources provided to them by Iran. So what you have in the north through Lebanon is Hezbollah, better armed, better trained, because they have a lot more room to operate in Lebanon. In the south, you have what's left of Hamas, and they're very limited in what they can do because Israel went in and pretty much just took over Gaza. And so they still have some unfinished business in Ramallah that needs to be taken care of, and they need to root out the rest of what is Hamas, and then they need to turn their attention to the north. That's all what's being spoken of. While all of that was being discussed, in comes Iran and does what they do. So what took place and what prompted that? If you remember back in kind of the latter part of January, I think it was around the 20th, somewhere thereabouts, Israel had intelligence that there were a number of personnel in a consulate in Damascus belonging to Iran. And in that place, there were some military people, including one very high-ranking general who had a great deal of oversight as far as what was happening with Hamas and Hezbollah, of training and equipping and all the rest. Israel saw it as a target of opportunity, and they brought the building down and took out 4 of these military people there in Damascus. Well, it was, if the events of October 7th had not taken place, none of this would have happened. So let's go ahead and make sure that we really fully understand kind of the genesis of all of this. What happened on October the 7th in Israel was, if you want to talk about unprecedented, that was unprecedented. And all up and down Gaza, for better than a 20-mile stretch, they came from a whole variety of different places, and they targeted almost exclusively civilian people to execute in the most barbaric ways. If you go back and read what all was done, it made the things that happened in the Holocaust kind of be reminded that the level of cruelty and really inhumane kind of things that they did, of putting babies in ovens, and the symbolism of it was just absolutely amazing. The execution of people, the raping of women, they just went after what would be soft targets and people who actually trusted them, interestingly enough, or had some level of trust along the border with Gaza. So anyhow, it was around 12 to 1,300 people were killed that day. Again, so many of them women and children. And so it was just a very barbaric and really a cowardly thing that they did. They took a bunch of hostages. And I think, again, that at the time, I believe it was a miscalculation. I think that they believed that a lot of people would come to their aid, and I don't think that they expected that Israel would reply in the way that it did. But if the events of October 7th didn't happen, nothing else that we see happening right here and right now, I'm recording this on a Monday, over the weekend is what happened when Iran sent all of their things. We'll get to that again also in a minute. So, if that had not taken place on October the 7th, we're not having this discussion. If not for the fact that for years, Hamas has been firing off homemade rockets out of Gaza indiscriminately to wherever they would land, once again, we wouldn't have this discussion. So, fast forward to where we are now. That happens in October. Israel begins to move in from the north, working on down towards the south. There's one major city left, and that's where, if they're still there, that's where all the top-ranking people of Hamas fled to. The big fish within Hamas haven't been in Gaza in ages. They're living fat in Qatar. They've got billions of dollars to their own personal accounts because they've robbed the people of Gaza blind. Let's be honest. So this idea that we need to send money to the people in Gaza, that's been being gobbled up by these people since they took control, about 17 years ago? And it's enriched the leaders of Hamas to the tune that they are billionaires. Several of the top people are worth billions. And they've just taken it because the world is stupid enough to continue to send money in there. And of course, the corruption that there is in the United Nations not bringing a halt to it. They're just kind of, we know from some of the things that took place on October the 7th, some of the people working for the United Nations were complicit in helping to carry out the attacks of October the 7th. And again, I'm not giving a whole lot of, I won't be giving links to all of these articles. They're easy to find. So anything that you're hearing me say, you'll be able to find the information online, or if you can't, let me know and I can send it to you through email. Oldpaththeology.net is the website. So, continuing on with this, what happened as far as October the 7th is concerned is really kind of what's the driving force behind all of this now. Initially, you weren't getting as much happening out of the north with Hezbollah, but this is all coordinated. I think Iran kind of, I think you could say, they didn't expect the lack of engagement from other people. And so it has really been Hamas and Hezbollah funded by Iran. And again, Israel's watching all of this. They know who is behind all of that. They know that Iran is the problem here. So they end up getting an opportunity to take out some high-level people in Damascus. And again, think about this. You have military people acting as doing what they're doing for the planning and the resourcing for their terrorist proxies in Lebanon and in Gaza, and those people are operating at a consulate in Damascus. Consulates are not supposed to be used for that. It was just a front. Israel knew it. Their intelligence had it, so they brought the building down on some really horrible people. So, interestingly enough, as far as our administration is concerned, they have, of course, done what you would expect is the wrong thing. And they're doing everything that they can to join the chorus saying enough is enough. Well, enough is enough from Iran. They said, we're not going to do anything else unless. Now, here's the problem with that. And the problem is whenever you don't reply, especially to people like Iran, it is kind of just a cultural thing. And it's really that part of the world. If you're going to do something very, very provocative, October the 7th, sending hundreds and hundreds of, whether they are drones or they're ballistic missiles, there are a number of different ordinances that they sent, all came out of Iran on their way to Israel. Now, a few countries were involved in helping to shoot the stuff down, and under normal circumstances, if all of that stuff could have made it to Israel, it would have been potentially devastating, depending on where all that stuff would have gone. It does say a little bit about Iran's capabilities and also about Israel and other nations' capabilities as well. This was all defensive, and that's a big, big difference. Because now Israel is put in the place of what is, to me, I think, kind of a bit of a no-win situation. If they do nothing, it really projects weakness. If they do something, then there is the potential that it continues to escalate. If I'm Israel, I don't know that I'm as worried about that option, because it looks as though Iran has done everything that it can to send what it sends, short of nukes, if they even have them, and there's all kinds of speculation on that as well. But the bottom line to it is that now, not only from our administration, unfortunately, because we're kind of setting the pace on this, if you go and read, if you haven't had a chance to, and you start to read the articles and things that are out there, our administration has made a lot of noise and said a lot of very public things that has really undermined Israel. And I guess of all of them, the ones that are pathetic and laughable, we've seen them do this a number of times. The administration and the people that go out there, whether it's Lloyd Austin or whether it's Anthony Blinken or whoever else they get to repeat the same silly thing, they're being asked, well, what would you advise? They were asked this before Iran launched everything. What would you advise Iran to do? And they've got the one-word answer, don't, which is just, it's not policy. It's laughable, it's embarrassing, and clearly, as I said to somebody where I was talking with them, don't is now the new did and do. And so Iran wasn't worried about us. They're not concerned about who we are. They know that we're insanely weak when it comes to this kind of thing. And I don't think for a moment that there was any back channel in this, because we've gone, as far as the administration is concerned, we've really emboldened Iran quite a bit, and they're flush with money in ways that they weren't before. Any wise counsel, I guess you could say, or any wise diplomacy by our administration would have been, as soon as they started to beat the drums, Iran, that they were going to be launching something, that should have prompted a phone call from our administration to say, if you do that, then we're putting back in every bit of sanctions again, and we will not hesitate to back Israel to do whatever they feel that is necessary offensively after they, after the deterrent and after they take care of the threat. We will back them 100% if they want to go lay waste to your country, and said that in really no uncertain terms. Instead, we're saying take the win. I saw that quote too. The win, as they see it, is that you were attacked, but you were able to defend yourself, so nothing hit the ground. You're okay, you're safe. Just call it a day. Well, Iran loves that. If you've noticed, they don't care that what happened, all of it was intercepted. The people in Tehran they took to the streets to celebrate the attack on Israel, even though it yielded nothing. I think the last I looked, a 10-year-old Bedouin girl was seriously injured from shrapnel that had fallen out of the sky. But in exchange, what did Israel get? They took out some major players on the military side of things. But that didn't stop the people in Tehran from taking to the streets and celebrating this whole thing. So that helps you to understand a little bit of the mindset of the people that we're talking about here. So if let's just play it out as far as the propaganda part of it, if Israel does absolutely nothing to respond, this. Remember back in the Iraq War and how they would have their press secretary go out there. If you remember him, we always jokingly called him Comical Ali, because he's out there talking about how we're winning and we're, the invaders, the infidels, blah, blah, blah. It was all this stuff that, we're standing strong, they're being defeated. But meanwhile, the reality is that they were getting wiped out. Well, this is kind of the same thing. All that they need is the propaganda from a willing population that wants to hear these things. So if Israel does nothing, I could write this press release from their propaganda people to say, see, Israel's fearful of us, they've backed down, we've shown our might, and they will not respond. The people in Iran, many of them, especially the radicals who support the mullahs and support the religious regime that's there, they hear what they want to hear. They're all in on this. Israel needs to be wiped off the map, and a large part of the religious believers there in Iran really believe that there's no way for them to get to the next step. Yes, they have an eschatology, they have a belief in the end times, and if Israel's in the land, it can't progress. So clearly, they are very much in the place of being highly motivated to remove Israel from the planet because that's really that they're an obstacle to their view of the end times. It's some pretty nutty stuff. Again, topic for another day. Let's stay with where we are in this. So Israel's in this very, very difficult place, and if you're sympathetic towards Israel, I really do hope that you're praying for them, that God gives them great wisdom on what next steps that there are. Let's just make sure that we know this. There are some certainties that we have if we believe what the Bible has to say. No matter what, I don't care what scenario you want to put before me, I know that Israel survives it because God says Israel survives it. I know that the enemies get crushed because God said that they get crushed. I know that ultimately Israel will have to stand alone because everyone will abandon them because God said that's going to be the case. Read the text on it. So the idea that we have a very weak administration now who doesn't seem in any way desiring to support Israel shouldn't come as any surprise to any of us because, again, the scriptures would tell us that. So it's always been one of those speculations. Why are we not mentioned in the scriptures as far as the United States being involved in this whole scenario? And there have been so many speculations, and again, it just changes by the years. We've heard it's a nuclear exchange with Russia. That was the popular thing 20, 30 years ago. It could be, are we so badly in debt? Do we end up getting crushed because of the things that we've done to our own country? And we're so incapacitated internally that we can't do anything. The Obama years came around and I started hearing what he was having to say and the contempt that he had for Israel. I thought, what about if we're just pacifists in this? And so weakened in the way that we do things that we would not dare be involved or even counsel Israel to take a very muscular stance as far as the military is concerned. Well, if we all want to be honest about it, the Biden administration is just Obama 2.0. Many of the same people, many of the same advisors. Take a look top to bottom of who's calling the shots here, and it's basically Obama. And again, not to be too uncharitable, when we watch or listen to our administration and especially the president, he doesn't have the slightest clue what's taking place behind the scenes. He's not in command of things. He couldn't be because he's not physically and mentally up to the challenge of it. So this is Obama policy. I don't think that's really any big surprise. Look at the players. So with all of that being said, Israel is in the place where we are not coming to their assistance. All that we're saying is don't. And so that's the closest thing that you'll find to a red line that we've thrown down, and Iran immediately stepped right over it. They don't look at us with any kind of fear. They're, again, we're an embarrassment. And Iran does not care a word about what's being said by the administration. They will cross every red line if ever one's put in front of them. That's just the reality of things. So Israel is once again in this place. Do they take the chance of potential escalation? And in the back channels, I'm sure that they're talking among themselves in Israel, saying, "Well, if that's the best that Israel or that Iran has, we've already proven that we can withstand what they are going to send." But do we give them the ability to do it again? Unfortunately, our administration and now Europe and everybody else that I've seen, nobody else has basically said to Netanyahu and the Israeli military, do whatever you need to do to keep that from happening again, and we'll back you. We're actually saying the total opposite. And they've done this publicly, which is so frustrating, and it only helps Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran when they hear from our administration, if you do something in retaliation, we will not participate, we will not back it. Makes it easy for everyone else to say the exact same thing. So here, if Israel does anything in the sense of retaliation, and if they try to do it in any way proportional, remember, we're talking about hundreds of drones that were sent, hundreds of drones, rockets, interballistic missiles, or ballistic missiles, rather. You've got all of that stuff. So a lot of stuff was sent over. That doesn't even count the Hamas and Hezbollah stuff that you have in the north or the south. This is all simply Iran. If Israel does nothing, it's a propaganda win as far as Iran is concerned. If they do something, they're doing it alone. Now, the one question would happen, or the question that comes up, which we haven't heard anybody really address, since we've told Israel, if you do, we will not back it. and I haven't heard a follow-up to this, but it's one I'd love to hear. If Israel was to say, well, we don't need you to do it, we have the capability of doing it again. Here's the question: what would happen if a whole nother wave came out of Iran and if it did escalate? I don't know too many nations that are looking to try to join in as far as if Israel or if Iran had another volley that they wanted to send. I can't see Jordan wanting to jump in. Who's really there that can do such things? Egypt, Syria is pretty much decimated and totally dysfunctional. And again, like I said, Russia has its hands full as far as Ukraine is concerned. So it would be interesting to see if Israel does retaliate, what does Iran decide to do, and who would join them? I don't know that you're going to get a lot of people wanting to join them. One thing that you had in this as well, you had many nations who had their territorial sovereignty I guess you could say that Iran, by sending what they sent, it went over the airspace of Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. Syria doesn't care. They're in the back pocket. But if you're Iran and if you're Jordan, and Jordan had a lot of stuff that they shot down, the question would be, are they doing it to defend Israel, or were they doing it because of potential locations that could have been hit in Israel that they have an interest in? Or are they concerned about, we don't want this stuff potentially falling in our country if it's not been, neutralized? There's a lot of speculation as to why some of the nations who really helped to do this did what they did. Was it purely for self-interest? I can't see a lot of nations just really wanting to help out Israel. It doesn't really work that well. We're talking about a Muslim part of the country or the world rather, and Islam hates Israel. Let's just call it what it is. So with all of that said, where does it go from here? We really don't know. And I know right now, as I record this, there is all of the planning and preparation for whatever the response is going to be from Israel, and we will see what it ends up being. Meanwhile, it doesn't change anything about what's happening on the ground as far as Gaza is concerned, or up in Lebanon with Hezbollah. That stuff is still fluid, and so we just don't really know what's going to be taking place going forward. It's really, again, completely left up to the way of speculation. So with all of that being said, when we watch over the next few days what's going to be happening and what Israel's response is going to be, that's going to really tell us where it takes it to the next level. Iran has been saying for weeks that they were going to be retaliating ever since what happened in January and the bringing down of that consulate. The important part of that is what has happened since then, and now that they've done what they've done, there's all the response. And let's again do the big picture part of this, because it's really important that we understand this. Our administration has, without any doubt, undermined the position of Israel. There's really no questioning that, because they have gone out publicly and said, we won't back what you're thinking about doing if it is an offensive move against Iran. We've made that public, which by doing so, we've made it easy for everyone else to jump in and do the same. I'm hearing Europe is speaking kind of that same way. I haven't heard if it's more just the European Union speaking that way, or if it's the individual countries. I just saw some things on that this morning and haven't had a chance to chase them all down. But the news is coming really kind of fast and furious, and so we're not sure exactly what's taking place. But consider what you have taking place in Israel, and this is why we need to be praying for them. I do want to pray for their well-being, but I don't do so with the fear that something may happen that would be, kind of an existential thing. Are they going to survive this? Of course they're going to survive this. God's brought them back into the land because we're in those days when Israel being back in the land is just part of the prophetic timeline of things. So they're going to survive this. There's no question about that. I have no fear of it. When you read Ezekiel, there's no reason to think that they should survive it because of what comes against them, and because of how small the area is, and the kind of overwhelming force that comes against them. But God is the one who decimates that. It's nothing other than God's intervention, as he has done so many times before. So we have the idiotic sloganeering of our country and the European Union and everyone else that's saying Israel should take the win, they should stand down, they shouldn't do anything else. But the flip side to that problem is that it emboldens more of the same. If the bad guys are able to see that Israel can be talked into not doing something by other nations, it only emboldens them. So this is the very delicate balance that's going on there. We want to be praying that God would give great wisdom on what they should do, and of course, we want to see the kind of casualties or potential of it for the people of Israel. We'd love to see everything to be exactly as it was in this first volley, where they didn't have any fatalities. But again, where does it go going forward? I don't know. My prayer is that the people would be turned to the God who has created them and who has made them a nation and made promises to them thousands of years ago that are in place as we speak today, and I have no doubt about that. I believe that the things that God said from Abraham onward to the nation of Israel are in force today, and the fact that they're back in the land is no surprise if we take the Bible literally. God said he was going to do it. So again, where does it go from here? Every single day gets us closer to having those things answered, but so much of what we're talking about is speculation. We know that appeasement is always a bad way of handling this. Our administration has proved that, and in this case here, many people are calling for more of the same. Let Iran do something that's without precedent. Listening to a guy this morning, this was the largest single volley of attack drones that has ever been launched in the history of the world. Now, we look at them as being slow. They're a one-way thing. They're kind of they call them kamikaze drones, but the payloads on them and the explosives on them could really do insane amounts of damage. So it wasn't as though it was something that Iran sent there that didn't really have much of a potential for a problem. The thing that worked in favor of everyone else that was potentially in the crosshairs, and let's remember there's over 1 million, there's 1.5 million, coming up on 2 million non-Jewish Arab people, non-Jewish inhabitants of the nation of Israel. And if everything that they fired over there would have come down, it would have made the number of casualties that you've seen in the entirety of the Gaza exchange, if we could ever really know what the actual numbers are. Hamas is the only one who's telling us the numbers, so none of that's trustworthy. They're going to lie through their teeth. It's just all that they can. But the amount of human casualties, the civilian casualties, if all of that stuff was allowed to land, I don't think anybody really fully understands just how bad this could have been had they not been able to shoot them down. So what worked in Israel's favor was the amount of distance that those things needed to travel to get there, and the fact that there were a number of people involved, a number of countries that were involved in trying to take them out before they got there. So by the time that they could have reached Israeli airspace, almost everything was gone, and very, very little of it ever even made it to Israel, and it was for the most part shot down and didn't do any kind of harm to any major things. The one where the little girl was hurt was well down into the south, more in the Bedouin area around a place known as Arad, kind of on the parallel, if you're looking at it on a map, with if the Dead Sea is here, it's pretty much straight across. It's in that lower part of the country where it's not as much. Beersheba is in that kind of area, but you're talking about well into the south of Israel and civilization. So again, all of that being said, anybody who tries to say that they've got this all figured out and they're speaking with certainty and this will happen next and then that's going to happen and that and that and that, if they are trying to say that with just like we've got this nailed down, if it ended up happening like they said, it's probably just dumb luck, because you just don't know what's going to be taking place. You want to look at the big picture. It's great to be able to speculate, that's fine, but make sure that you know that it's speculation. There are a number of ways that this could go. We won't know until we get an idea of what Israel's going to do in response to this. That'll be the next big question. And then, when does it get to the point where that part settles? All the while, Israel needs to be also very much aware of still what's happening in Gaza, and more importantly, up in the north with Hezbollah. Now, again, this time next month, so much more of this is going to be clear. I'm keeping my eye on what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. That's even something that can have some of that can have bearing on what our Congress does as far as more aid going to Ukraine, the bottomless pit of Ukraine. So who knows? Again, in a couple of weeks, we'll probably do an update on this because it's not going to go away. And it's something that's, needless to say, very, very important in the minds of so many. And so we want to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, as Psalm 122 says. But we want to be praying that God has his hand upon the country and watches over them, of course, gives wisdom to the leadership. But ultimately, we do know that they survive all of these things because God has promised that he would. The day just comes when everything kind of comes to a conclusion, and nations will move against Israel, but God will intervene with that. How much this current thing could have a play in that, who knows? Again, speculation. So last thing I'll say on this, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens in the Arab world. I've read some things where some people in the Arab world have seen Iran, whether they like them or not. They do see them as the most powerful and belligerent group against Israel. And there is a real divide within Islam between Shia and Sunnis. And so Shia is the much smaller faction of the two. Sunnis account for roughly 80% of Muslims, the other 20% of the Shia. And the Shia are the ones who run Iran. And you can't say that they're the more radical, because Osama bin Laden was part of a sect of the Sunnis known as the Wahhabists. So they hate Israel, they hate Jews, that's just the way that it is. They hate Christians if they're the fundamentalist types. But Iran has been incredibly belligerent towards other Sunni nations, namely Saudi Arabia through Yemen, their proxies in Yemen. You've seen them a lot in the news because they too are being funded by Iran. And so they're the ones that are attacking all the people coming into the Red Sea area and all of that kind of whole part of the world. But Jordan doesn't like them because, again, Sunnis versus Shia. It'll be very interesting to see how those nations and the divide between Sunni and Shia, if you want to look up who's who, really pretty much as far as that world is concerned. During the times in Iraq with Saddam Hussein, he was Shia but very secular. But the inhabitants, the people who lived in Iraq, were much more Sunni than they were, or much more Shia than they were Sunni. So it's just, again, there's so much internal intrigue even within Islam of what happens going forward. They look at Iran as a real threat to other Muslim nations. And it was really why you got some people kind of on board with the Abraham Accords during Trump's time, mainly because it was a good way of isolating Iran. And Iran was very much isolated during the Trump years, all done by design to keep them from doing the kind of stuff that we're seeing now. And this administration has reversed that, like they've reversed so many other things. And it not only creates problems here in our part of the world, it happens in the rest of the world as well. So weak leadership, especially from our country, it just has such an incredible ripple effect worldwide. But when it starts to affect Israel, this will be the last I'll say on this, and we'll conclude. I start going back to kind of some of the oldest things that you can find as far as the scriptures are concerned, that being the book of Genesis, chapter 12, and God making that statement, again, without a shelf life. When he said it, he said it as an eternal thing. I'm going to bless those who bless you, Israel, Abraham and your descendants, and I'll curse those who curse you. And if you ever wonder why that part of the world just lives in the kind of condition that it does, they have been antagonistic towards Israel, especially since Islam took over, and what they've done in that part of the world for centuries, and what they've done since the inception and the regathering of God's people into the land, really going back into the last 2 centuries. But then when they became a nation again, 1948, that really became a matter where the nations of the world are going to be held to account as far as God is concerned of how they dealt with Israel. And I see us now at this point, 2024, dealing probably as treacherously with them as any time in our country's history. And that will not bode well for us in the future going forward. So much speculation, much going on, much that is still left to be answered, and so many things that we will find in the next weeks and months to come. I'll make mention of it. We do have a trip that is planned to go to Israel at the end of October, and I am incredibly excited about going. I can't wait to get there. I'm hoping that everything is able to be opened up to us so that we can do that. What Israel does going forward with this will hopefully make sure that that takes place, because Israel will begin to engage in some way, in maybe even a stronger way than they have forward, or in the past rather, or recently, to try to mitigate and really slow down any potential for the Irans of the world and their proxies to do the things that they're doing. I think Israel has a real interest in trying to get things back to the way that they were before October the 7th, and that means not pacifying, but that means destroying and taking apart the ability for another thing like that to happen again. So it's an unsettled part of the world. Israel will always be a problem to this world as far as what to do on it politically. Zechariah tells us about that. That's the cup of trembling. That's to just realize that nations don't know what to do about this. And you see that happening right now. A great example of it is our administration would have been weak on this anyway, but you can tell they just don't know which way to go on this, and how should they say what they say without trying to undermine our relationship with Israel, which is really very strained now because of the administration. But where does it go, months, weeks or months from now? Once again, we can't really tell for sure. But we do know that God will take an accounting of how nations deal with Israel. And yes, they are the rightful owners of the land. God has given it to them. And yes, it is His to begin with, but He has given it to them as an inheritance. So God owns it, but He's given it to them. There's really no debate on that, if we're going to take a biblical stance on it. So we'll check this back in a couple of weeks. We'll get back to the book of Psalms next week. And if you're interested in the Israel trip and want some details on it, it's scheduled to go at the end of October this year, the 28th through the 10th of November. And we are praying that we're able to get there and support the Israeli people. I know that there's a group of people that are there right now, and they are the people that are expressing such thanks to them that they're willing to be there. And I really want to get there to support that. Plus, it just changes people's lives getting a chance to see it in person. Of course, if there are security concerns, we wouldn't be going. We wait until it's safe to travel. So all that said, I know that there's a lot of information I've thrown out there to you. If you have any questions and follow-up you'd like to do on this, then please contact us through the ministry's website, which is Old Path Theology. I'll be monitoring the comments that we get in the YouTube channel. These tend to really foment a lot of interest, but also some people that can sometimes not be all that diplomatic in the things that they say, and we will be monitoring that as far as the comments are concerned. I don't want to shut those things down, but I also don't want to see a lack of civility and really some pretty awful things I've had to take off of other YouTube videos where people will engage who shouldn't. Not stable. Anyhow, you can contact us through the ministry's website. Once again, that address is www.oldpath, oldpaththeology.net about the Israel trip, about the contents of what I've shared with you today. If you'd like any further information, if you're having trouble finding information and would like to know some sources and would like to do some reading up on it, you can contact me there, and I'll be happy to discuss those things with you. So next week, we pick up Psalm 119. Later this week, on Thursday, we will be concluding our study through the book of Jude, and then the following week, we start in the book of Revelation. Also, we have a conference that's coming up in Appleton, Wisconsin, which will be starting on the 26th of this month. And I'm sure that what I've talked about today will have a lot being spoken about because it's a prophecy conference. Calvary Chapel of Appleton, you can go to their website and you can get the details to watch it live stream, and looking forward to getting there and being involved with that as well. So we will pick up next week at Psalm 119.